homeless. We're obviously disappointed that we won't be meeting with you in person today, but we hope that today's program will inspire you and create more energy as you advocate. Please feel free to add your name, organization, and where you're participating from in the chat. We'd love to see where people are joining us from. We would like to give a big shout out to our sponsors. We have presenting sponsors, Frederickson and Byron, and the Greater Twin Cities United Way, and our champion sponsors, Aon, Avivo, Community Action of Ramsey and Washington counties, and House of Charity and St. Stephen's Human Services. So as we move forward to the preview of our speakers, I want to let you know that we have a very special lineup of speakers today, very excited, each of whom will reflect and share on key victories that have been achieved over the past decade, wins that have been made possible due to your tireless advocacy. This is a unique day on the Hill in a year that has created significant challenges. Together, we need to take the time to reflect and on our victories and remind ourselves that we are part of a larger movement that envisions the home for every Minnesotan, every child, every adult, and every senior across our state. Today, we'll only be able to scratch the surface of the depth of commitment, grit, perseverance that brings us to where we are today. I'm excited to hear from so many advocates that have believed that efforts to address homelessness and create housing stability were and are possible. Advocates that thought big, that thought creatively, and that thought more broadly than their own self-interest, and that have led with both tenacity and compassion, digging into the exciting and sometimes difficult coalition work that had to be done. I also want to recognize the importance of people with lived experience that have shared your victories and your challenges. Stories are power, and your story matters. Thank you for your vulnerability and willingness to bring your lived experience to policymakers, because it is truly essential to our collective work. I'm grateful and humbled to share this virtual space with you today, and excited to welcome a distinguished group of leaders to share their powerful stories of advocacy. First up, we're going to have Kenza Hadj-Moussa share. She is the Public Affairs Director for Take Action Minnesota and the former Communications and Development Director at MCH. Kenza is going to share with us on how the partnership in the Prosperity for All campaign helped to secure a $100 per month increase to the MFIT program after 30 years of stagnation. Welcome, Kenza.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kenza Hadj-Moussa. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the Public Affairs Director at Take Action, zooming in from St. Paul. I'm so excited to be here for days on the Hill and with all of you across the state. As Rhonda mentioned, before joining Take Action in 2016, I worked for nearly 10 years with the Coalition for the Homeless and St. Stephen's Human Services on the issue of housing, which is dear to my heart and is fueled by a fire that I think we all feel. It's a fire that says we have enough for all. We have enough for everyone to be prosperous. We have enough for every person, no matter who they are, to have a safe, stable place to call home. And that we have had enough of the structural racism and sexism that is a root cause of homelessness in Minnesota and across the country. So I wish we could bring our fire in person together, but for the advocates on the call, I feel your energy, I feel the urgency, and I can feel the collective power of all of us this week. Of course, this isn't just any day or week. Many of you have probably noted that this is the 1-year anniversary of COVID hitting Minnesota. It's also about the 1-year anniversary of the state implementing a policy that you all helped pass, which took many, many years through the Prosperity for All campaign. It was signed in 2019 and was implemented in February 2020. And that was the campaign to increase cash assistance for MFIP, the Minnesota Family Investment Program, by $100 per month. Until that time, MFIP had not been increased for 33 years, which is as old as I am now. A family of two received $437 in 1986 and $437 in 2019, aside from a small housing allowance that was passed a few years before that. It took years of advocacy from MFIP families and groups like MCH, Legal Aid, Children's Defense Fund, the Budget Project, so many more, as well as the Lieutenant Governor, Senator Mary Kunesh, so many commissioners past and present who helped get the MFIP increase over the finish line. This work started in 2013, 2014, but what it meant was that by the time the pandemic hit, thousands of Minnesota families were getting an extra $100 a month. And I can only imagine the difference that made when such a crisis hit families all across the world. This campaign was a moment to teach us that with years of effort and fire and advocacy, it is possible to move the needle. It also really helped unveil the fact that homelessness is a math problem at its core. We need housing to end homelessness, and people need money. This has also been a theme throughout the pandemic that I think we've been saying at MCH for many, many years, but that people need money to live. So that looks like MFIP and the minimum wage and benefits for frontline workers who've come to call essential. It means stimulus checks for everyone. It also means that when we're looking at COVID relief, there's no such thing as a true recovery if we're leaving out MFIP families, if we're leaving out undocumented Minnesotans, people with disabilities, people who haven't been working, women of color. There's so many Minnesota families that have been really left behind in how the COVID relief has gone at the state level and federally. That's something that take action. I hope that we can help move the needle on, but I'm really, really glad to be part of this fight to say it's not complicated, that everybody has dignity and needs both money and housing to live a good life. But I can't wait to celebrate more housing investments with you, investments in shelter later this year. I'm so grateful for everybody's advocacy and time and energy here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenza, and thank you for sharing about that history with MFIP and Prosperity for All, and just your commitment to justice work in our state. Next up, I would like to introduce Patrick Ness. He is the Executive Director with the Heading Home Funders Collaborative, has a long history of leadership in the advocacy community, including leading policy for MCH in the early 2010s. Before joining the Heading Home Funders Collaborative, he served as a senior advisor to the Lieutenant Governor. Patrick's going to share with us about the Save General Assistance Medical Care, or GAMC campaign, which helped ensure people who needed health insurance were still able to access it. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, and the whole team at the Coalition for the Homeless for putting on this day. I know firsthand how much work you all have been putting in, and it's one of the days I most look forward to every session. Hi to everyone. Really grateful to be here and talk about General Assistance Medical Care, GAMC. We got to go in the Wayback Machine to 2009 to talk about GAMC, but it was a healthcare program that had been in place for 35 years in Minnesota, specifically for single adults who couldn't work and earned $8,000 or less per year, most of whom just had the $203 in cash from General Assistance. 3 days before the 2009 legislative session ended, Governor Pawlenty line item vetoed all of the funding for the second year and ongoing for General Assistance Medical Care. We were all shocked. Everyone was shocked that it was just kind of canceled out. So that was about $800 million in the per biennium moving forward. 35,000 Minnesotans were on this program receiving health care at any given time, and about 70,000 Minnesotans throughout a year relied on GAMC to get their health coverage. I remember after session, there was a failed veto override on the House floor, and I sat in the gallery for that, and it was one of the most heart-wrenching debates, not one of, it was the most heart-wrenching debate I'd ever seen on the House floor. And they were debating the humanity and the kind of ability for people to live their lives, and there were veteran lawmakers in tears. It was powerful. I know I went and sat in my backyard, and I think I stared at a tree for a couple of weeks, just kind of making sense of what happened. And we started organizing, and we pulled folks together, a lot of people on this call, and built an 18-month campaign through the Save GAMC Coalition that was powerful. And I just want to say that the work was rooted in relationships first, centering people who were most directly impacted. That's where the work started and built from. And that not only was the right way to do it, it changed everything about the power that we were able to build, the story that we were able to tell. It kept us engaged in the work in really important, meaningful ways. In advocacy work, I find that if the relationship comes first, and if you're rooting it in people with the most at stake, those are the fundamentals to build a really powerful, transformative campaign. And so that's the work that happened. There are so many twists and turns, but I've taken lessons from that and for years to come, and we saved GAMC, and it's now part of the Affordable Care Act, and folks have the coverage, but I carry it deep in my heart, and thanks for the opportunity to be able to just share a couple minutes on that.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for sharing about Save GAMC. I was listening to a program yesterday, and they were talking about dignity, and having access to healthcare is a dignified thing. And I think as Minnesotans, we believe in dignified housing. We believe in dignified healthcare. So thank you for sharing that story. And next up, we're going to have Liz Kuoppala. She is currently the executive director of the Mahube-Otwa Community Action Partnership and a former executive director with MCH. Liz is going to talk about the creation of Homes for All and some of the victories along the way. Homes for All is a statewide coalition of over 270 endorsing organizations that advances shared policy initiatives aimed at creating housing stability for all Minnesotans. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Rhonda. I wasn't here for mic check, but I think you can hear me, right? Yeah.
We sure can.
Thank you. So one of the best decisions I did as executive director at Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless was to hire Rhonda, Patrick, and Kenza. So I'm honored to be here. So I wanted to just start with just taking us back to 2008. In the years of budget deficits after the 28 recession, housing and homeless advocates were pitted against each other in a debate over whether housing or homeless services were more important. Was it more important to invest in building units or more important in meeting the emergency homeless and support services needs? And legislators used that, sort of pitting us against each other, to give neither group much of anything. So these were dark times in Minnesota's history, but it is in darkness that stars shine the brightest. Jennifer Ho, then at Hearth Connection, wanted a campaign focused on increasing the size of the pie. Her vision, we could accomplish more working together than competing against each other. Daryl Dannon, then at MCCD, and Julie Johnson at MHP were willing to support homeless services if we could support funding for construction and rental assistance. Trista Mattis-Castillo knew she could get thousands of mission-based habitat volunteers to support homeless services. Laura Cadwell and Kathy Tenbrook said they could bring the grass top sector, business leaders, faith leaders, philanthropic leaders to the common cause of asking for a bigger pie. Monica Nilsson, Kathy Hine at St. Stephen's, Julie Manwarn at Simpson, Amy Baker in Moorhead, Liz Olson at Chum in Duluth, Marie Ellis at Catholic Charities, Susie Emmert at LSS, along with MCH members all across the state, said that they would collect stories from sheltered guests, community volunteers, and frontline staff. Minnesota Housing Commissioner at the time, Mary Tingerthal, suggested a focus on bonding could be a good test for this theory of one big shared campaign, since the homeless sector hadn't previously been much involved in bonding for construction projects. Chip Hallbach at Minnesota Housing Partnership said we could use the name Homes for All that he'd been using as a tagline for a conference he convened every 4 years. We knew that to reach beyond the typical homeless advocates to get the attention of, we knew we needed to reach beyond typical homeless advocates to get the attention of lawmakers. We all used whatever connections we had to get endorsements from labor unions and school districts and mayors and county boards, from faith communities and hospitals and architects and real estate agencies, from chemical dependency counselors to soccer moms, college students and preschoolers. Everyone pitched in whatever ways they could. Our guiding principles were that our effort needed to be statewide, bipartisan, and focused on a singular ask. We agreed we would not negotiate before we got to the negotiating table. We stayed firm. Legislators heard us. They started wearing our stickers. They started using our talking points. They won over their colleagues. We worked together on a cause much bigger than any one sector or any one person. In the end, we won a historic victory together. In the past, our bonding bills had sometimes been $3 million or $5 million. We asked for $100 million and got $100 million for housing. The next year was an appropriations year. We spent the summer and fall cobbling together a strategy and an ask. Appropriations are harder since they are real cash and not borrowed money. There's more committees. The messaging is more confusing. There are several different funding streams. That year, we won $37 million in ongoing investments. Each year, regardless of political environment, Homes for All has created ways for interested community members to get involved around a bold ask. And each year, you prove again that when everyday Minnesotans come together with one voice declaring Homes for All, we all win. The numbers keep adding up. These numbers, these wins, aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are not just the bigger pie Jennifer Ho imagined over a decade ago. They represent housing security for young families, for veterans, for seniors. Housing stability helps kids do better at school and workers do better at work. Housing stability helps Minnesotans sleep at night. So whether I listed your name at the beginning or you were part of those fights early on and have been part of the fights ongoing, whether you're just getting started, I want to thank you for your courage. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for helping us lead the effort to end homelessness in Minnesota. Thanks, Rhonda.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for being a trailblazer and talking about all the other trailblazers that led the way for Homes for All, and giving us a brief history of Homes for All. Next up, we're going to talk a bit more about Homes for All, but we're going to switch over to Dominic McQuerry and Erica Valliant. Dominic is the Director of Public Policy and Community Relations at Wilder Foundation, and also has a long history of advocacy with the Homes for All Coalition and serving also as a policy advisor to the Lieutenant Governor recently. Erica Valliant is the whole systems family manager at People Serving People and is also a board member of the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless. Welcome, Dominic and Erica.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning, Minnesota. I'm Erica Valliant. I am the whole family systems manager for People Serving People.
And I'm so excited to be here today and see so many people on the call. I'm Dominic McQuerry. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Public Policy and Community Relations at the Wilder Foundation. And excited to be here with my friend Erica to talk a little bit about Homework Starts with Home. But before we dive into the legislative history, we should talk a little bit about our origin story as friends.
Yeah, so when Don was just a baby intern at Wilder, and I was starting out as a new Promise Neighborhood Parent Council member, we got the chance to meet at a conversation about rental assistance, and more specifically, the very rental assistance program that had pulled me and my family out of homelessness. Wilder was working with St. Paul Promise Neighborhood, the Northside Achievement Zone, and Lakes and Prairie's CAP agency in Clay County to make a rental assistance program into an ongoing, a rental assistance pilot into an ongoing program. They were working on the proposal and they were in dire need of some parent power.
And as many folks on this call today know, getting ongoing funding from the state is not easy. And even when it's for a program to ensure that kids and families have stable housing, it shouldn't take this long, but it took over 5 years to get Homework Starts with Home into the base budget. The first funding for the pilot that Erica was talking about came in 2013. And every session between 2013 and 2019, advocates worked trying to get Homework Starts with Home into the base budget. There were years where we get right up into that finish line, and then they'd go into the back room, and at the last minute, the program would be pulled out of the deal. But finally, in 2019, we got $3.5 million in the base budget, passing a bill with bipartisan chief authors. And the years of work that was done by a coalition of people around the state, parents who could speak to the challenges of raising a family without stable housing, program staff who worked with those families day and night to try to keep them stable, and sometimes the kids themselves speaking their truth about how the lack of affordable housing, lack of stable housing, impacts every part of their life, including their ability to do their homework.
Elder Pam, one of the elders in our parent council group, always tells us and reminds us how important it is to be a part of the decision-making process. Her words to us are, if you're not at the table, you're on the table, right? And that is a rally call if I've ever heard one. Parents and kids, grandparents, aunts and uncles, community members, all showing up at the Capitol together is a powerful sight to support parents and children as they share their personal stories with legislators in their offices and with large groups and committee hearings. It forces lawmakers to see us and hear us, hear our real voices to attach to the stories that they hear when we're trying to get this legislation passed. There are real people and real lives at stake here. And the power of our stories and our voices sharing our own stories, they help to shape the decisions that are being made at the Capitol. In closing, what I really want to share is that we know, we were all taught in school that every living thing, every living being requires food, water, and shelter. The lack of housing in our state and the number of homeless community members is not only a public health crisis, it's a public humiliation. We can and we must do better, and we need to do it faster than 5 years from now. We need to do it right now. Let's continue to build our people power and use that power at the Capitol, use that power at the voting booths, use that power in the community, at our city council meetings, at our regular county meetings, wherever we need it, to make sure that everybody has a place that they are proud to call home. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both. And that was a great rallying cry for just everybody to engage in advocacy. And so as we think about that, I do want to introduce Commissioner Ho. She is our next speaker, and she has a long history of leading efforts at the state and federal level to address homelessness and housing instability. She's a nationally recognized champion, and today she's going to share with us on some key victories that have contributed to her tagline, "Go big so everyone can go home."
Thanks,
Welcome,
Rhonda.
Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks, Rhonda. And boy, it's just great to see Kenza, Patrick, Liz, Dom, Erica, you, Rhonda. I am envisioning myself at the church just across the street from the Capitol. I am imagining all the pews filled with advocates. We've all got our talking point papers. We've all got appointments with legislators. And yeah, like here we are in pandemic land, right? But we cannot underestimate how important advocacy is at this specific moment in time. So I'm thrilled to see that there's over 150 people who are signed in here, and I know that you all have the ability to reach out to 5 or 10 more people and get their voices out there. Right now, we've got 4 big things happening at the Capitol that we need you to pay attention to because they're just really important in terms of what happens going forward. First of all, the evictions moratorium is still in place, and Governor Walz is committed to making sure that we have a rational off-ramp to the evictions moratorium when the peacetime state of emergency ends. It's one of the strongest actions that we've been able to take in state government to prevent homelessness during the pandemic and during the recession. And it's really just saved lives. We've seen that in research on places that have had an evictions moratorium and places that haven't. It saves lives. So we've got all of this new federal money coming with the COVID-19 emergency rental assistance. We're going to get that online real soon. And we need people to have a chance to access that so that tenants can pay their back rent, landlords can get paid, and they can pay their bills. It's a win-win. So making sure that we have an off-ramp that gives us an opportunity to get cash in the hands of people who haven't been able to pay rent is really, really important. So I really hope that you all include in your advocacy the need for a rational off-ramp to the evictions moratorium when the pandemic is over and the peacetime state of emergency ends. Second, we're looking for a comprehensive set of tenant protections. Minnesota has some of the fastest eviction law in the country. And we're trying to figure out how to make sure that people get a notice before an eviction is filed, to have an eviction not be on their record before the court's even ruled, how to make expungement be easier, and not allow landlords to discriminate based on your source of ability to pay. If you have a Section 8 housing choice voucher, a landlord shouldn't be able to say, I won't accept that. That's as good as cash. In fact, it's a guarantee that rent's going to get paid. We've got new appropriations for housing in the governor's budget proposal. If folks didn't notice, the state budget forecast is far more optimistic than we thought it was going to be. We've got $14 million of one-time appropriations in the governor's budget proposal, and they're spread out across a range of different programs. We need you to say, we need these investments in housing now, and to make sure that we get these increases. And then, of course, housing infrastructure bonds, $100 million of housing infrastructure bonds. Hey, if you say you want more, I'm good with that. But 100 million, we got that in October. That was historic to get 100 million authorized for housing infrastructure bonds. And we matched those bond authorizations to projects by December. We can put these dollars to work quickly, and we desperately need more housing. The housing infrastructure bonds are about 20% of the governor's bonding proposal altogether. That's extraordinary. It demonstrates the governor and lieutenant governor's commitment to housing. I'm trying to go fast here because I know we're on a tight timeline. I'm so excited to almost be with you and to stare at myself on the screen. But I really want to say that advocacy today matters more than ever. We're in this bizarre Zoom legislative session. We can't pack the rotunda and chant and cheer and make our voices heard so loudly that every legislator has to wonder what's going on, what do we care so passionately about. So your ability to send an email, make a phone call, get a Zoom chat, or as I like to say, put your issue on a tennis ball and throw it at your legislator's house. Whatever you can do to get your voices heard on the need for more housing now, it's so important. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for fighting for these issues. Help me get a fantastic package of an evictions off-ramp, tenant protections, new appropriations, and a bonding bill this session. With that, back to you, Rhonda.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's a lot of really great common sense reform, and some of that is also reflected in the Homes for All agenda too, which we're all advocating for as well. So next up, I want to welcome Raven, Gibbs, and Tammy Moreland. Tammy Moreland represents the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative to End Homelessness, and Raven Gibbs is the Native American Outreach Director from U.S. Senator Tina Smith's office. Welcome, Raven and Tammy. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Tammy, you're on mute. Technology.
Sorry about that. Anin Buju, Ningani and Nimki Benasi Ikwe Indigenous, Mgizi Ndundum, Gitchi Wikwe, Dunsing, and Dunjaba. My name is Tammy Moreland, and I represent the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative to End Homelessness. And I'll let Raven introduce herself.
Yes, good morning. Buju Anin Ojawan Kodakwe Indigenous, Mcqueary Ndundum, Good morning, everyone. My name is Raven Gibbs. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Native American Outreach Director for U.S. Senator Tina Smith. And our little section, Tammy and I are going to talk about tribal access for the Continuum of Care funds. And I'm going to toss it back to her to talk about the Tribal Collaborative and where the idea for this bill came from.
Okay, in case you don't know about the Tribal Collaborative, we consist of the northern tribes of Minnesota. We have White Earth, Red Lake, Leech Lake, Boys Fort, Fond du Lac, and Mille Lacs Band. We get together twice a month to talk about issues regarding homelessness. And one of the things that we were aware of is that as tribes, we were not able to apply for the HUD funds that the Continuum of Cares receive. And so we had a meeting and we invited a whole bunch of people, and Raven came as a representative from Tina Smith's office, and we brought our issues to the table. And then we started working on making some changes to the legislation so that tribes would have the ability to receive the same monies that everyone else receives that participate in Continuum of Cares. I'll turn it back over to Raven.
Yes, absolutely. So as Tammy mentioned, I was really fortunate to represent the senator in one of the Tribal Collaborative meetings. And of course, they had really talked about the issue of lack of access to continuum of care funds through the HUD program. So I had brought this issue back to our team, and we worked on debriefing the senator on the spectrum of the issue, really did some information gathering. And after multiple conversations with Tammy and folks at the Tribal Collaborative and different stakeholders, the senator, really concerned about this issue, about the lack of access. And, one of the committees she sits on is the Senate Committee of Indian Affairs, and she takes that seat very seriously. So she wanted to introduce legislation and really try to remove that barrier. So she introduced the Tribal Access to Homeless Assistance Act back in July of 2019. And that was a bipartisan piece of legislation. And that legislation was really built in collaboration with, tribes and tribal designated housing entities and, the stakeholders at Minnesota Tribal Collaborative and Minnesota Housing, and of course, HUD. And within this last year, through the lens of the pandemic and recognizing the pandemic's impact on housing stability, Senator Smith also made this piece of legislation part of her priorities going forward, and spent the year advocating to Senate leadership the importance for tribes and tribal designated housing entities to have access to these funds. So it was at the very end of the year that the bill language was included in parts of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, and of course became law on December 27th at the end of 2020. And I will toss it back to Tammy to talk about how important it is now that this bill is law, and of course the further future work to do.
Thank you. So we are very excited, the members of the Tribal Collaborative, that we have this opportunity, thanks to all the hard work from Tina Smith's office and all of those who she connected with to help get this bill passed. One of the things that we're working on in real time is the emergency solutions grants. We originally had thought that that was part of the wording in the bill that just recently passed, and we recognized that it wasn't. So we are continuing our work to make changes with the senator's office so that tribes will be able to access the emergency solutions grant funds. One last thing that I would like to say is that we really need to listen to the whispers of our ancestors. And when we see something that needs to be changed, don't just think, oh, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. Just take the first steps, draw on the strengths of your ancestors, start making those connections, start talking about it, invite the right people to the table, and you will be able to make changes. And we are very thankful to the senator for all of her hard work and her continued hard work to helping to make sure that homelessness people have homes on the reservation and throughout the state of Minnesota. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Raven for closing words.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo, of course, Tammy, that was, I think, drawing strength from ancestors and community is so important, and you said it so beautifully. And yeah, just thanks for the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless for having us today.
Well, thank you both for talking about some of the systemic barriers that in particular tribes face in accessing those federal resources, and how our collective work can really make a difference in breaking down some of those barriers. So, and thank you to the Senator for moving those pieces of legislation forward. Next up, I am going to introduce Commissioner Harpstead. She leads the Department of Human Services, which work spans healthcare, children's services, and in particular, programs to address homelessness in Minnesota. In her previous role, she led Lutheran Social Services and worked at Medtronic. And I want to welcome the Commissioner now to share with us how DHS is leading its work and prioritizing homelessness.
Hello, thank you, Rhonda, and thank you all for inviting me to join you today for Homeless Day on the Hill. You are important partners in our work. I'm really pleased to be with you today. It was good to hear Kenza recite the tale of the historic increase in MFIP a couple of years ago. I assume you know we're working hard this year to further improve MFIP and to get an additional cash grant for MFIP recipients. If you're not familiar with that, check it out and add it to your advocacy. This year, I learned more precisely what I had known generally for a long time with the publication of DHS's report, Improving the Health of Minnesotans Living in Deep Poverty. Average rent across Minnesota has risen by 12% since 2010, while the average wages of renters has decreased by 5%. So while I appreciate the stand that housing ends homelessness, I've come to better appreciate this year DHS's necessary role in developing shelter strategies as a bridge to affordable housing. We've collaborated with the Interagency Council on Homelessness, other state agencies and stakeholders to address the needs of people who are homeless, both during the pandemic and for the long haul. We created over 300 additional safe spaces for people experiencing homelessness through the Minnesota Winter Homelessness Initiative last year. Remember last year? That was 7 years ago. Dan Pollock of DHS co-led with the formidable Kathy Tenbrook, the governor's at-risk populations work group for the pandemic response, securing critical resources for shelters, additional safe spaces, and other supports for people experiencing homelessness. With temporary state and federal COVID relief funding, we created over 2,800 short-term safe spaces, most of which were in hotels and motels. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Those I work most closely with know how much I love the hotel model we discovered through COVID. Having lived through the effort to secure bonding money or tax credits to build housing in my past life, what a gift we found in hotel buildings with ready-made private rooms with private bathrooms and locks on the doors, not to mention offices and conference rooms on the first floor for appointments, therapy sessions, and housing counseling. I hope we continue to pursue the possibilities of this strategy after COVID. We've also worked with Minnesota Housing and the Department of Education to support homeless students and their families through the Homework Starts with Home initiative. In addition, we're pleased to see progress through the Housing Stabilization Services Program. Since its July 2020 launch, the program has enrolled 3,500 people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Minnesota was the first state to make these services part of its basic Medicaid program. Including Housing Stabilization Services in Medicaid recognizes the connection between health and stable housing. Challenges such as mental health and substance use disorder can make it difficult for someone to find housing, manage a budget, keep a home, interact with landlords, and understand the rules of a lease. Advocates with Housing Stabilization Services help people find stable housing and provide tips for managing rules and interactions. There are certainly many challenges, but every day it seems there are bright spots on this journey. One dazzlingly bright spot is the Avivo Indoor Village in Minneapolis, which I recently toured. DHS was among the state, county, and city agencies that combined provided $6 million to help make the village a reality, along with private money. Each room in the village, which is set up inside a warehouse, has a door that locks, providing a level of personal space rare in traditional shelter. Other examples of beautiful efforts DHS has been privileged to support is a project by our heroes at the American Indian Community Development Corporation, which opened multiple new shelter and housing opportunities in time for this winter, with more than 70 new beds across 2 new facilities. And an amazing project by St. Louis County and Boys Fort Nation to expand emergency shelter services to over 1,000 people. And across DHS programs, more than 21,000 people every year receive support to find and maintain housing to get out of crisis. And you are all part of what makes that happen. We're indeed making a difference in combating homelessness. There's so much left to do. Governor Walz's budget proposal recommends critical investments to address homelessness, including improving access to emergency services and resources for communities to help people move into stable housing. This includes increasing base funding for emergency shelters by $10 million per biennium through the Emergency Services Program. That would increase this availability, accessibility, and safety of emergency shelters and allow longer lengths of stay if needed, giving people greater access to services and to address employment, housing, and other needs. This proposal would also increase staffing for emergency overnight services so more individuals and families have access to services they need to transition into housing. The governor's budget also calls for investing $10 million more per biennium in community living infrastructure grants, giving counties and tribes support to weave housing into human services and supports. Housing needs to be part of our mainstream system. This funding provides outreach and housing resource specialists to help people get into shelter or connect with longer-term housing solutions. It increases staff capacity to recruit, train, and onboard more housing providers to expand housing support in your community. This effort helped more than 10,000 people with housing over the last year in half the state, and we want the capacity statewide. The proposed budget calls for establishing base funding of $1 million per biennium for the Homeless Management Information System, a critical tool, as you all know, to better understand the homeless population and connect individuals and families with resources. I'm grateful that the governor and lieutenant governor have made tackling homelessness a priority, and I'm grateful for your work. Thank you for all you do to help the individuals and families who don't have the safety and security of a permanent home.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for highlighting just some of the things that directly relate to our agenda as well. You know, we need shelter, we need that capacity, and the housing support program has been such a powerful tool during the pandemic to get people into housing. And you know, you perfectly set up our next speaker, who is Bridget Stevens from Avivo. She's going to talk about Avivo Villages. Bridget has a long history of working with adults experiencing homelessness, coming from Chicago and landing here in Minnesota. She's one of the leaders of Avivo Village, as I previously mentioned, which just opened this week. Thank you, Bridget, for being here to talk about the village, and we're really excited to hear more about it.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you again, so much for the wonderful intro. I'm really excited to be here today to speak a little bit more about Avivo Village and some of the work we've been doing here. I'm excited even more so to talk about it just because I think it's a great example of how to serve individuals, especially in a pandemic, as it's all, we've all seen how the pandemic has played out in social services. So Avivo Village is a project that's comprised of several tiny homes within a warehouse space. And it's a program that works with individuals surrounding gaining permanent supportive housing. It's been designed specifically for those, living unsheltered, but it's also been designed to be COVID aware. And so with that, I just want to briefly highlight, what we're doing and the COVID protocols we have in place in this shelter facility to make sure residents and staff stay safe. And I also want to highlight, the services provided and how the program works itself. So Avivo Village has, specific things in place to continue to keep residents and staff safe, as I said, amidst this pandemic. We have, of course, the 100 tiny homes. So each individual resident, when they come in, has their own space dedicated to them. They have a space where they can lock their personal belongings in their home, in addition to, additional locker space and additional storage outside as needed. Individuals get meals 3 times daily that are catered in. There are single occupancy bathrooms and showers on site, in addition to independent laundry facility sign up. And of course, there's regular, cleaning, scheduling, and sanitation stations throughout the facility. So whether it's on the floor where the residents are at, or in the offices, where they're meeting with us, we're continuing to make sure we're cleaning regularly, providing that PPE, and getting access for folks to testing and vaccinations. So we have medical services on site regularly to help, provide those things to staff and residents. And we have partnered with Healthcare for the Homeless that in the event that someone were to test positive, we would be able to move them over to a hotel to get them the care that they need. So we're continuing to implement these things to make sure that this shelter model is going to be safe for folks while we're in the middle of this pandemic. Moving on, I think the biggest thing to kind of highlight is the services as well. So Avivo Village is a low barrier shelter. It follows a housing first model and has a harm reduction approach. So we're really trying to meet folks where they're at when they're coming in. The goal for each person is to find a path for permanent supportive housing. And so with that, we have a robust amount of services on site to provide for folks. So that includes a housing services team with housing case management, a MNsure navigator, and community health workers. It will include a clinical team that'll have mental health professionals that can really address that mental health and chemical health components for folks. We have medical services in partnership with McQuerry. So we have a nurse that comes on site currently 3 times a week, but we're working to bump that up as we get more residents in. We have an operations team that includes 24/7 security services and resident advocates that are with the residents at all times on the floor. And then connection to treatment. So we're really working with folks for connection to treatment, connection to mental health therapy, any kind of training that residents might be wanting, employment services, and then any other services, maybe outside that we're noticing people are requesting. So continuing to kind of bump that up as well. And on average, we anticipate that individuals will be housed for about 90 days at the villages in order to successfully take their next steps. With that being said, we did kind of unofficially open on December 30th amidst construction to our first 16 residents. Of those residents, 7 of them have moved on to permanent housing, which is great. So we're continuing to bump that up. As was mentioned, we officially opened as of Monday. And so far we are housing 24 residents here. And we plan to be and reach capacity of 100 residents by the end of April. So continuing to bring that number up and meet that need. So with all of that being said, I would just want to mention that Avivo Village, it wouldn't be possible or wouldn't exist without CARES Act funding and the countless partnerships and with nonprofits, community advocates, elected officials, and government agencies. And I think this Avivo Village is a really good example of how ongoing investment in shelter improvements and emergency services is really necessary in order to address the issue of unsheltered homelessness. So I appreciate you all letting me share a little bit about the village. It's a project that I'm super passionate about. My colleagues are super passionate about, and we're really ready to see what's next. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bridget, for highlighting just the innovation and creativity, the partnership that's been happening to make this possible and to bring people inside. So next up, I want to welcome Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. The Lieutenant Governor is a mom, an advocate, a member of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, and Minnesota's 50th Lieutenant Governor. Her career has been built on standing up for children, working families, communities of color, and Indigenous communities, and Minnesotans who have historically been underserved and underrepresented. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor.
Sorry, I am right here, everybody. Good morning. I'm really honored and humbled to be able to be with you today. And boy, do I appreciate you putting this picture in here, celebrating our victory to increase MFIP. We have a lot more work to do, but I have to tell you that we don't spend enough time celebrating. So that's a really good thing. So good morning, everyone. And Rhonda, thank you for everything that you do. We are so appreciative. And thank you, Commissioner and Raven and Tammy and all of the powerful speakers today. This is one of my favorite events of the year. And I'm sad that we can't be together in person, but I'm really glad to be able to be with you virtually in this moment. And I look forward to when we don't have to do this event anymore, because we've simply taken care of each other and have met the need for all Minnesotans. But homelessness and the impact of not having a home has become clear to Minnesotans over the past year in a way that it has never been before. And I know that many of you have seen this crisis firsthand for years, even decades. And I know that many of you have been sounding the alarm bells for a long time before there was a pandemic. But if this is your first Homelessness Day on the Hill, thank you. Your voice matters, and we need as many voices as we can. We need to respond and lead to ensure that every person, every family, and every child has dignity, and we see the dignity in our fellow Minnesotans. And in this moment, we have an opportunity together to help even more people hear the alarm and move everyone with the power to action and to act. From the beginning, our administration has really focused on housing. It has been a priority for the governor, and it has been a priority for me. Housing is central to everything else. A safe, warm place to sleep and a sense of home shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right. And that's why the governor has issued one of the strongest eviction moratoriums in the country. And it's why it continues to be in place today. Folks need to be able to stay in their homes. And it's why we've dedicated new and additional state and federal funding and resources to support the response to homelessness and the COVID-19 pandemic across the state. From CRF investments and coordination to new isolation spaces for folks sleeping outside to protect them and others from COVID-19. We know too well that the housing crisis disproportionately impacts our relatives from Native communities, Black communities, and communities of color, and the response deserves urgency. That's why I'm grateful for the unprecedented coordination from leaders across sector and across region to respond to COVID-19 and to support those experiencing homelessness. To all of the outreach workers, shelter staff, organizations doing direct work on the ground and on the screen today, I see you and I thank you. We know that shelter saves lives and housing ends homelessness. We have to have an urgency in both, because as much as work went into last year's COVID-19 response, we are still in a crisis. There are still Minnesotans and relatives who do not have a safe place to sleep. We have more work to do. It's why the governor and I have continued to propose historic investments in housing in response to homelessness, because it is a priority, but also because it is long overdue. In the fall, we were able to pass a historic $116 million in housing investments in the bonding bill. Now in our budget year, the governor and I have proposed historic investments in homelessness and housing stability, including $10 million in an increase to the emergency services program to sustain shelters and our crisis response, $10 million increase to the community living infrastructure grant so that people experiencing homelessness are connected to all of the resources that they need and deserve, funding to finish the job of ending veteran homelessness and stably house more kids who know that every day homework starts with home, and $100 million in housing infrastructure bonds as part of our commitment to go big so that everybody can go home. I wish I could tell you that based on our past experience of this last year, that we had legislators on both sides of the aisle lining up to support these proposals. We do not. I also know that as advocates, you are pushing and advocating for more investments than what I described, and we completely understand why you would. But we also really want to make sure that you know that the investments we have proposed are not over the finish line. It's going to take a lot of advocacy and a lot of muscle and a lot of heart to make sure that every legislator and every district knows why these investments matter. And here's the deal. I am not saying that you need to lower your sights, but please make sure that when you make the pitch, you're telling people to go even further than the governor and I have challenged us to go. There's nothing wrong with a yes and to the life-saving investments we proposed. We can't leave anything on the table. So let me close with this. I know that this has been a hard year for all of you. It has been a hard year for me too. But in this hardship, we've done things that a year ago, people would not have even believed was possible. And people's lives have been saved because of it. We should not rest. We should instead remember the lesson that they teach us, that a year from now, we could come together again saying that we have done what others thought impossible. I know you, and that we are the people who can do it. One day, as I mentioned earlier, I hope that we do not have to gather on this day. But until then, we will center those who are both directly impacted by this work, focus on investments in both shelter and affordable housing, and continue working together to learn from what this past year taught us. And before I go, I want to just highlight the incredible work of local partners across the state who have delivered exceptional care and are now working to deliver vaccines. To our unhoused members, our unhoused community members and staff working in sheltered spaces. Thank you for making Minnesota a national model in this work, both for protecting our relatives experiencing homelessness during the pandemic and now in providing life-saving vaccines. Thank you all. Be bold and be proud. And now I will hand it over to my partner, Governor Tim Walz.
Well, good morning, everyone. And Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, thank you. Minnesota has no greater champion for children and for those who experience homelessness than Peggy Flanagan, and no more effective leader. And I would like to note personally, and with all your friends on here, our deepest condolences to you. The Lieutenant Governor lost her father-in-law yesterday. Earlier last year, she lost her beloved father, and she lost her brother to COVID-19. Lieutenant Governor's personal grief has not slowed her down one bit, and it has refocused her on families that every day are facing these challenges. So, Lieutenant Governor, I am proud to be your friend. You lift me up and make me a better person every day, and we are grateful for you. To Rhonda, thank you for your leadership. We know that this is about partnership. We've got our small piece in this, that we will fight and do everything we can to deliver the funding and the policy proposals, but it takes the commitment of true servant leaders that bring compassion, empathy, kindness, decency, and above all else, effectiveness to this work. And that's the folks on this call. Every day I try and pause to be thankful for the things I have. And some of us were born with the privilege that you simply have those things. But I take time out to look around me and recognize this. I have to tell you today, my little thank you pause is, I am thankful to live in a state that Bridget Stevens would choose to move to and do her work. Listening to what's happening over there and to see activists and folks who get things done, it is amazing. So I'm grateful. And the Lieutenant Governor's right. This year has been like no other. I said early in the pandemic to my team, we would make every decision based on what's best for Minnesotans to protect every life we could and to do the right thing. And if those decisions meant that they were unpopular or they were not politically expedient, we would make them twice as hard, because we are not going to shy away from this work. We have been given this opportunity together to make a difference, and we are. And I know those challenges have been immense. It is hard enough when someone has stable housing or stable access to healthcare or stable access to mental health care. Put someone in a position where they have none of those, and they are so vulnerable that it is almost unimaginable. So each and every one of you lifting up and keeping people safe and making sure that all of the things from housing to healthcare to vaccinations, testing, PPE, all of those things were delivered. We are incredibly grateful. And Lieutenant Governor's right. Go out there and make your case. But I wish we lived in a perfect world where folks on this call who just simply get things done did not have to stop and pause and convince people that every human life is worth having dignity around, that housing mattered, and that you have to go and try and make the case. But you know what? It's a privilege to do this work. And I'm glad that you're there making the case, and we stand with you. When we craft a budget, we're very cognizant that that's a fiscal document, but I think the Lieutenant Governor and I would make the case that all of you on this call see that budget as a moral document. It's a reflection of what we value. And we better measure things, and we better get results, because if you don't measure it, you don't truly care. And that goes to how many people have stable housing, and it goes right into equity around vaccinations. And I know this is a challenge, and I know there are those that would make political hay out of this, but those folks that whether they are homelessly, they have a home, or they're homeless, or they're just instability between places, it should make no difference with protecting their health and getting them a vaccine that can save lives. So I want to thank all the advocates on here who have made all of those things possible. Know that we will continue to invest in things that matter to us, and you're going to see it around housing. You're going to see it around children. I'm incredibly proud of that work. It's really helpful when you have a Children's Defense Fund executive director as lieutenant governor to make the case, and where the Save the Children Fund said nobody has done a better job of protecting their children in the pandemic than the state of Minnesota. That's you. That's the folks on this call, and protecting our most vulnerable children. So I'm incredibly grateful, and I'm going to end with a thank you of all the folks who serve, but from the lieutenant governor to Jan Malcolm at the Minnesota Department of Health, Jodi Harpstead at DHS, and then Jennifer Ho at Minnesota Housing. Minnesota is blessed with 4 of the most powerful, ethical, and effective leaders in this country. And I am glad that they are bringing all of their talents to make state government figure out a way to tear down silos, work amongst agencies together with a single-minded focus of giving the dignity of safe, stable housing to every single person in this state. So you've got partners. We know what our job is to do. We're grateful that you're out there, and together, let's get this thing done. Let's make this happen. Let's make sure that every single time we gather, we're talking about historic investments and progress that we made of sheltering people and ending homelessness. And let's set that goal and talk about that we do have an expectation that it's not just hyperbole. We expect every person to have stable housing in this state, and anything short of that means we have more work to do. So thank you all for gathering today. Thank you for the incredible work you do. And I am just incredibly grateful, not just as governor, but as a Minnesotan, to live in a state that cares so deeply about all of our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for being here today and for sharing words of inspiration and rallying us as we move into the next stage of our work today and tomorrow, which is being an advocate. So we are going to move over to our slides on advocacy. So first thing I want to raise up is, if you don't follow us on social media already, please do. We're on Facebook and Twitter, and you can stay up to date on all of the advocacy opportunities happening through those channels. Participate in our tweet chat tomorrow with lawmakers and advocates. That's tomorrow over the noon hour. The details will be on our website, and we'll review that in just a little bit as we take you to our advocacy toolkit. And then a reminder of our Homeless Day on the Hill action alert that came out with the email about today's program. But we'll also show you another spot that you can find that information as we move into slide 2. So we know that this year we are not able to gather, which means that we're not able to walk up after the program to the Capitol and make those visits with our lawmakers. So this year, we're relying on you to schedule those visits with lawmakers. And if you have any problems or need any assistance, you are more than welcome to reach out to us. You just need to email policy@mnhomelesscoalition.org. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move over to the MCH website to look a little more closely at our advocacy toolkit. So our website is mnhomelesscoalition.org, and at the top, you can see the tab that says Advocate. And if you click down to Homeless Day on the Hill and click there, it will bring you to a whole host of information about the homeless days on the Hill that we have going on this week. So there's a whole bunch of information here, but if you scroll down just a little ways, you'll see 2021 Advocacy Toolkit. And if you click into that, we have a lot of different resources that will help you. So the first thing we want you to do is to complete the Homeless Day on the Hill Action Alert, which you can see as the first bulleted item on this page. That will bring you to a great software system that we have to make it quick and easy to send an email to your lawmakers and to leaders. A reminder of the tweet chat, of course, that's tomorrow during the noon hour. If you're interested, you can certainly look more closely at our press release and media advisory about our events this week. Now the next items will be our legislative agenda and one-pagers. Those go more in depth about our key priorities for shelter and housing this legislative session. We also have the 2021 MCH Legislative Agenda Overview. There's how to develop your story to share with lawmakers if you're interested in developing that more in depth. There's also information on how to schedule a meeting with your lawmaker, in addition to the lawmaker contact information, which is going to be really key in making that lawmaker visit. So once you reach out to those lawmakers and get those visits this week, next week, or the following week, we really encourage you to, again, reach out to your lawmakers and schedule a Zoom call and let us know how it goes. We would love to hear more feedback on that. So, you know, as we kind of close things up today, I want to thank everyone for being here today, for being advocates, for caring about people experiencing homelessness, and for working to end homelessness here in Minnesota. I want to thank our speakers, our sponsors, and of course you as the advocates. And we know shelter saves lives and housing ends homelessness. And so as we work collectively towards the solutions across the continuum of housing services, I thank you and encourage you to go forth and advocate.